he won't stand again in an election in the UK for first past the post, but that he would under proportional representation at a general election. Many of us would campaign for it, and I think we would win it hugely. So there was a referendum back in 2011. Politics was in a very different place then, and actually the system of PR they put forward probably wasn't the ideal one. So yes, I think there would be a referendum, and I think we'd win it hands down. So we've had a very exciting week. We had 4 polls in double digits, 10 or 11%. That's the first time we've had national polls in double figures. I said to someone 2 weeks ago, by Christmas we'll hit double figures. We know the momentum is with us. We know that as more and more people hear about Reform UK, they look at our policies and they realise, actually, yeah, do you know what? That makes sense. Good old-fashioned common sense. So, yeah, we've got lots of momentum behind us. Who knows, we might be 12 or 13 by Christmas.
So even 12 or 13%, that's huge. But I mean, how does that translate into first past the post? What does that translate to in seats?
Well, that's the challenge, and we're not under any illusion. It's quite possible and totally unfair that we could get 11, 12, 13% in a general election and, heaven forbid, 0 seats. So that would be 3 to 3.5 million votes and potentially get no reward for it in the House of Commons. And I think everybody would say, any rational person, that's not right, that's not fair, it's got to change. And I think the country is now ready for proportional representation. It's the fair system, it's the system that's used in the vast, vast majority of developed nations. In fact, in Europe, we only share first past the post for our elected chamber like this with Belarus. It's not great company, is it?
In terms of when you're speaking to voters on the doorstep, is there a sense they feel disenfranchised by the current system?
Massively, because if you're in a very safe seat, let's say you're in a safe Labour seat and you happen to be a Tory voter or a Lib Dem or a Reform voter, you feel disenfranchised. You say, well, it make no difference. Why should I bother? And that's just not right. And here's the thing. Where there's PR, proportional representation, in other nations, the average turnout is about 10% higher. That's another 3 million people in the UK who would be voting, who would be engaged in the democratic process. That has to be right. That has to be a good thing. You'll get better results on that basis. And the point is, look, I believe in competition. The Conservative Party, I mean, they're supposed to believe in free markets, enterprise and competition. So why do they want to shut out competitive new entrants, new good people with new ideas, disruptive ideas? That's how you make progress. That's how business makes progress. Frankly, it's how politics should make progress.
I mean, the simple answer to that would be that they would not have a minority government if we were to introduce PR. I mean, you have the potential there to scoop up like 40, 45 seats.
Well, if we got 10% of the votes, we would have over 60 seats. If we got 15%, we'd have 90 seats. We would literally hold the leverage on the balance of power. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a very good thing. So, but that's the fair thing, where that when you go to the polling booth, every single vote is counted and matters equally. That must be right in a democracy. It can't be right that some votes are worth more than others. And when we had the Brexit referendum back in 2016, the reason the turnout was so high was everyone knew that every vote was equal, every vote counted.
Labour at the moment are benefiting from the anyone but Tory vote. I mean, that's why they're steaming ahead in the polls as they are. But, I mean, what are the possibilities of you perhaps stepping aside in some Conservative seats to ensure that...
Absolutely zero. I've been very clear about this. Frankly, they could offer me £5 million in a peerage and the answer is still no. Too many people still think that I'm going to bottle it at the last minute. The answer is no, absolutely no. I've actually offered to eat my Akubra Australian hat. It's just not going to happen. Here's the thing. We did the right thing back in 2019. We stood aside in 300 Tory seats to let them get Brexit over the line, and we assumed they would then do it properly. They've failed. They've blown it. They've messed up. They've completely let everybody down. They had their chance. Frankly, it's now their turn to do the right thing, the decent thing. They should stand aside. Let me and Reform UK take Keir Starmer head-to-head, and I tell you what, the result will be fascinating. I would beat him.
So if you did have a system of PR and then you gained 50 seats, say hypothetically, then you would have to work with Conservative MPs to get anything over the line. So, I mean, in that scenario, can you imagine the Conservatives perhaps bending a bit more towards your policies?
Absolutely, because the truth is, many Conservative MPs believe in our policies, but they're tribal and they can't get themselves away from that tribe, that tent. But in reality, the current Conservative Party is not a Conservative Party. It's a sort of wishy-washy, power-hungry bunch of social democrats. That's what it is. And it's a huge, broad umbrella of people who are just all there in the pursuit of power. We've got real principles, real convictions. We know the difference between right and wrong. We tell it as it is. And sometimes that's difficult. That's the reality. But when I'm campaigning up and down the country, people really appreciate just the simple candour as we tell it, as we put forward our policies.
I think there is a fervour growing for proportional representation.
I do, because so many people say to me on the doorstep, Richard, I like your policies, I like what you stand for, you seem a decent bloke, but look, I don't want to waste my vote. I've got to back the winner, or I'm afraid of the other side. You shouldn't vote on the basis of being afraid of someone else. You should vote constructively, positively, with enthusiasm, where you know that your vote will count, will matter at the end of the day when all the votes are cast and counted. And that's got to be a good thing. That will improve people's enthusiasm for politics. It's so depressing when people say to me, a plague on all your houses, it's not worth voting, I'm done, I'm politically homeless. That's a disaster for democracy.
Can you imagine that would be a system that would attract Nigel Farage back into politics?
Actually, he's already said on a number of occasions that he won't stand again in an election in the UK for first past the post, but that he would under proportional representation at a general election. And yes, I think that's eminently possible if he wants to. Who knows?
It'd be interesting. I will, and it'd be interesting to see Reform campaigning for proportional representation. Can you imagine that being something that you would put part in your manifesto?
It'll be in our what we will call a contract for the people, because we're not going to call it a manifesto. What we put forward will be absolutely cast iron guarantees. So we'll put that in there. Interestingly, on this, we actually share common ground with the likes of the Liberal Democrats, and a big chunk of the Labour Party wants proportional representation. Once again, it's only Keir Starmer and the team around him are sort of sitting on the fence, seeing which way the wind blows before making a decision. I believe Andy Burnham wants it, people like Sadiq Khan want it, so some very senior figures want it, and other small parties. It's better for democracy. There's no defence for the current status quo. And the old line that first past the post leads to strong and stable government, well, we've had chaos under this Conservative regime, despite having an 80-seat majority. So that's completely and utterly trashed. In the bin, don't ever say it again.
I mean, you're amongst people who ran a very successful campaign for Brexit, so can you imagine yourselves being successful with PR?
Oh, I think we could be hugely successful with PR. As more and more people hear who we are, about Reform UK, what we stand for, and here's the great thing, momentum and success breeds success. And as people say, who are these people on 10%? Where do they come from? Well, the reality is we've come from sort of 1-2% 2 years ago. We've achieved in 2 years what UKIP took about 18 to 20 years to achieving in terms of getting to double figures. And I think that's because people like what they hear, they like the messaging they hear, and they know the country's completely and utterly broken.
In terms of, where the country is at the moment, you say a lot of people want PR, people on the doorstep are crying out for it. If it were to go to a referendum, how do you think it would go?
Oh, I think many of us would campaign for it, and I think we would win it hugely. So there was a referendum back in 2011. Politics was in a very different place then, and actually the system of PR they put forward probably wasn't the ideal one. So yes, I think there would be a referendum, and I think we'd win it hands down, 2/3, 1/3, maybe 70-30. But it's an important part of the debate. So yeah, let's have a referendum, bring it on. I quite like referendum. I have a track record of winning them.
Can you imagine yourself and Nigel Farage then with 2 referendums under your belt?
Oh, it'd be fantastic, wouldn't it? It might be quite interesting sort of campaigning alongside the Lib Dems, but there we are. It would be, we'd make a thing of it, and I think actually people would appreciate that. Different parties from different ends of the spectrum, but actually a common cause to improve democracy. Yeah, I think it'd be great, and Nigel and I were like referendums on a number of things, whether it's net zero, ECHR. I think we'd win all of them.
Just got to ask you, how do you think Nigel's doing so far in the jungle?
He's obviously very early days, but I think he's gaining support, gaining enthusiasm. He's showing calm, solid leadership, which you would expect. And whilst others around him are sort of screaming at the sight of the odd snake or the odd rat or whatever, I think he'll love it. He may miss some of the finer things in life, but he'll do very well.
Some commentators are saying, well, actually he even said it himself, he's almost used to it because he's used to the snakes in European Parliament. I mean, do you think he'll fare well?
That's the reality, is that he is used to snakes in politics, whether it's in Brussels or in and around Westminster. So, I think he's got plenty of experience.